To order. Welcome to meeting number 6 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officers. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk will advise the chair on whose hands are up to the best of his ability, and we will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. First, I would like to inform the adoption of the motion last Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, and after consulting with all parties in this committee, I have instructed the clerk to extend an invitation to representatives of GoFundMe and FinTrack to appear before this committee this Thursday from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Further information will be provided as it becomes available. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House of Commons on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, and the motion adopted on Tuesday, December 14th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of street gangs. With us today by video conference from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Chief Evan Bray. And from the Toronto Police Service, Myron Demkew, Deputy Chief, and Lauren Pogue, Staff Superintendent. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Witnesses may choose to split their allotted time for opening remarks with other witnesses if they so desire. Welcome to all of you. I now invite Chief Evan. 5 minutes. Chief, the floor is yours.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of this distinguished committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. I do co-chair a CACP Special Purpose Committee on Firearms that's been tasked to study growing concerns related to gun violence in Canada from a public safety perspective. Firearms, as we know, is a very polarizing debate that can be highly divisive and emotionally charged on all sides of the issue. The CACP believes in balancing the privileges of individual Canadians with the broader rights of society. As police leaders, we place a priority on public safety and the protection of those most vulnerable among us. The committee is comprised of numerous experts from across Canada working together to understand the complexities of firearm crime in our country. The CACP is working closely with organizations like Public Safety Canada, Canada Border Services Agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and the Canadian Firearms Program. Combining our expertise in guns and gangs, investigative firearms tracing, statistics, and other things opens the door to enhanced collaboration and information sharing. The committee identified 4 key themes that will help guide our work over the next couple of years: strategic approaches, legislative initiatives, education and prevention, as well as data collection and information sharing. Over the past 2 years, we've provided feedback on firearm-related legislation, such as Bill C-71 and Bill C-21, to improve what is a strict and responsible form of gun ownership in Canada. And while we should always strive for continuous improvement with legislation, we also need to find ways of reducing gun violence in our communities using the best evidence-based practices. How crime guns make their way into our communities, the types of guns being used for criminal purposes, the perpetrators using guns to commit crimes, and other areas related to firearms can differ greatly across Canada. So to ascertain how, when, why, and where firearms are being used to commit crimes in Canada, we need good data. And to this end, the Special Purpose Committee on Firearms worked with the Canadian Centre for Justice and Community Safety Statistics to ensure that good firearms data was being collected consistently across Canada. For example, in 2021, we set new standard definitions for firearms terminology related to shootings and crime guns. We also amended the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey to include new firearm codes to distinguish between seized, stolen, and recovered firearms, and the first results will be expected in the fall of this year. Two large areas requiring further work are the origin of crime guns and in Canada. With our partners, we're conducting a study on the origins of crime guns to monitor trends and examine the effectiveness of policies and interventions. In parallel, we are also working to increase the uptake and capacity to complete firearm tracing. We want to understand the benefits and the challenges with respect to the existing process in Canada to better inform operational steps and address legislative gaps related to gun crime. This issue is not law-abiding Canadians who want to own firearms. The issue really is people that are involved in criminal activity who are obtaining firearms through illegal means, such as cross-border trafficking, theft from legal gun owners, and straw purchases. The absence of purchase records effectively stymies the ability of police to trace non-restricted firearms that have been used in a crime. Firearm tracing can assist in identifying the suspect in a crime and the criminal sourcing of that gun and any trafficking networks. The disturbing trend in gun violence is largely related to gangs, lower level street gangs, and more sophisticated organized crime groups. So to stop it requires a whole society approach. It starts with education and prevention early on to address root causes that lead people to the gang lifestyle in the first place. It's about exit strategies for people in those lifestyles and leading them towards a healthier path. And finally, it's about enforcement and ensuring that we're going after the criminal elements who are perpetrating violence in our communities. We want to use proper investigative techniques, have them in place, and have appropriate consequences for those who commit acts of violence. In conclusion, we respect the debate that is occurring and understand the various positions on this issue. It's not our goal to punish law-abiding citizens for the actions of criminals. Our goal simply is to ensure the safety and security of all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Chief Dale McPhee, I now invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Oh,
go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Chief Bray has said, I would certainly agree with the not our law-abiding citizens and the disturbing trends on gang and the data. So I think you in just a few opening remarks is just give you some of our statistics that we're seeing both from the Edmonton Police Service and from the province. So last year we had 41 homicides, 14 of those 40 homicides involved a firearm, and one involved both a firearm and an edged weapon. The racial background of the 20 people responsible for these homicides, 8 white, 7 Indigenous, 5 Black, so it's across the diversity of our community. 17 of the accused had a criminal record. 7 of the homicides, the victim and the suspect were not known to each other, and 21 of the homicides where the victim and the suspect did know each other. 12 of the homicides are gang-related, 19 of the homicides were not, and 9 of the homicides that are currently under investigation, gang involvement is still unknown. 7 of the homicides for sure are related to drug trade related, which is some statistics I'll show, and 12 of the homicides still not known if there was drug usage. 1 of the 40 homicides was domestic violence, and 4 of the homicides were family-related violence. In relation to the number of shootings that Edmonton had in 2021, we had 150 shootings. In 2020, we had 158. So we were down a little bit. And then this year to date, we've had 10. When we talk about firearms seized, which is also something that we pay close attention to, in 2017, we had 1,016. And this past year, we had 1,633 guns seized. So you can see certainly a trend up in relation to that area. In the province of Alberta, which we track obviously as all police services through our criminal intelligence service, 503 shooting events were reported across the province, which is down 5%. Most common level of injury with shooting events was bodily injury in 35% of them. 73% of these shooting events believed to be targeted attacks. In Alberta, there were 546 firearms stolen and 114 break-and-enters. Obviously, a lot of these were being acquired through break-and-enters. The other thing I would just highlight is over the last year, in Alberta, we had 53 trafficking in firearms investigations, which was up 20%. Handguns were found to be trafficked most often, 110 of those followed by rifles and shotguns. 63 offenders identified as being either buyers or sellers of 17 potential straw purchases were identified as well. One last thing, and I'd leave before we've also did some research in relation to the drug patterns in certainly the Edmonton area through our research team. We've seen a real shift. In 2007, the main drug was cocaine. When you saw very little meth, very little opioid, and very little heroin. 2014, it remained the trend. In 2014, it started to trend where by far our drug here now most often recognizes meth, which as you all know is associated with some significant violence as well and significantly attracted in relation to our gangs. And obviously with that, we've seen a real increase of opioids and the increased use of heroin. And just for information's sake, it seems like cocaine is no longer very prominent in our community. So those things, although we continue to research those, are obviously closely related to some of the trends we're seeing. And it shows some distinct changes when the legalization of marijuana came into effect and how those drug patterns changed. Not that that was the indicator, but it's just goes to show that the stronger drugs are certainly more involved than they ever were. We have obviously lots of things to talk about in relation to things that also could be done, but I leave that for the questions and I'll leave that as my opening comments. And again, thank you very much for having us all here today to discuss this very important topic.
Thank you very much, Chief McPhee. I now turn to sir, you now have the floor for up to 5 minutes. It's all yours.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning and thank you, Chair and committee members, for this opportunity to address you today. I'll spend a few minutes speaking about the proliferation of illegal firearms.
Hello. Is there a point of order? I'm hearing some
Oui,
voices.
Monsieur le Président, c'est Christina. Quand vous prenez la parole, le son est intermittent. Les interprètes ont la difficulté à traduire.
The interpreters have a hard time hearing. There are breaks, and the same thing happened when Mr. McPhee spoke. There was no translation available.
I was reporting a problem with the translation, that it is breaking up. Clerk, could you please look into that and report back to us right away?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair?
Yes, clerk.
Yeah, so it looks like there have been some issues with the Zoom platform in the building. We are looking into it, but as of now, we can proceed if you wish, and then if there's a problem, we can stop again and check with our technicians.
Well, we'll try it, and if there's a translation issue, then we will have to suspend until it's sorted out. Let's hope that it has already been sorted out. So I will turn back to you, Deputy Chief Demkiw. Let's try again. You're starting from the top of the clock, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to address you here today. I'll spend a few minutes speaking about the proliferation of illegal firearms, and in particular, illegal handguns, and the violence perpetrated in Toronto using these firearms. I'll also touch on recent trends and highlight a number of recently implemented strategies to enhance our prevention, intervention, and enforcement efforts. Shootings and homicides continue to be a concern in Toronto. Just last year, we saw a 20% increase in the number of homicides, and of the 85 murders committed in 2021, 46 were shooting homicides. The traumatic impact of gun violence on communities is unacceptable. The number of firearms-related incidents far too high, and we are seeing emerging trends that are of concern. There were 408 shootings in our city last year, resulting in 209 victims. In 2021, 86% of crime handguns that could be sourced were from the United States. The percentage of criminal handguns that are sourced to the United States has continued to rise since 2019. There's an increasing concern over the involvement of younger persons in shootings and the risk that our youth face from gun violence in Toronto. In 2021, the average age of persons involved in shootings, either as an accused, suspect, or person of interest, dropped from 25 years of age to 20 years of age. The number of shell casings seized at shootings has risen significantly in 2021. We have seized 2,405 shell casings at crime scenes, representing a 48% increase over the previous year. The Toronto Police has undertaken a number of initiatives to respond in a more effective and holistic way to gun and gang activity. Our approach is rooted in our legal obligation to deliver community-centric policing, conduct investigations and enforcement, and importantly, prevent offenses and assist victims. We understand the social cost and the unintended consequences enforcement tactics can have on residents, families, and communities. As a result, the Toronto Police is focused on strategic enforcement, which is squarely aimed at the most impactful and violent offenders. Community members and organizations have repeatedly called for greater coordination between police, community supports, city resources, and all levels of government. Additionally, it's been recognized that getting upstream of the need for enforcement must be a continued priority of any sustainable policing model. The Toronto Police has partnered with key city representatives and developed an executive leadership table to facilitate greater public safety collaboration. Additionally, we've introduced a strategic framework in regards to gun and gang activity to provide a coordinated, multi-sectoral approach in partnership with our communities and guided by the City of Toronto Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, known as SAFE-TO. Introduced in 2021, SAFE-TO is a city-led collaborative plan that includes the development of a comprehensive multi-sector gun violence reduction plan, which is to address the complex challenges posed by gun and gang activity. The goal is to shift from reliance on reactive and siloed response towards a model of integrated prevention and intervention that tackles upstream root causes. The Toronto Police is committed to additional prevention and intervention initiatives with the creation of our Integrated Gang Prevention Task Force, designed to offer those wishing to escape the gang lifestyle the proper resources, guidance, and mentorship to do so. In conclusion, gun violence and gang activity continue to be the most significant public safety concern of people in Toronto. This criminal behavior has a direct impact on victims, their families, and our neighborhoods as a whole. Community safety is a shared responsibility that requires coordination and collaboration between all levels of government, the police, communities, and social services to address the complex root causes that lead individuals to use a criminal firearm in the first place. There's a need to not only stop the proliferation of illegal guns from the United States, but to also address underlying causes of violence resulting in trauma in our neighborhoods. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. I now would like to open the floor for questions. And at the top of the first round, I would call on Ms. Dancho. Ms. Dancho, you have 6 minutes for your questioning slot. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the chiefs of police and deputy chiefs of police for coming before committee today to discuss this critical issue impacting your cities and residents of Canada. And I thank you first and foremost for your diligence and your efforts and the efforts of your officers to put their lives on the line to keep our community safe. I have a number of questions for all of you, but I'll start with Deputy Chief Demkiw. I was very impressed with your remarks in terms of your outreach to the community, looking at a community level. I think you were really talking about, sounds like to me, youth diversion as a primary tactic to combat gun and gang violence. And if you could just comment a little bit further on the resources the Toronto Police and other police forces need to really go after youth when what we're hearing at committee is when you get a youth that's sort of doing that petty crime, maybe stealing a car or break and enter, we're hearing as young as 8, 9, 10 years old, they're starting to do that and they kind of go on that path of gang violence. Can you comment on that and what resources are needed to invest in more youth diversion programs?
Thank you very much for that question.
Oh, your mic boom is down.
Thank you very much for that question and the opportunity to discuss this a little further. We're really rooted, we're fortunate to have partnered with our city subject matter experts who are leading our SAFETO, our community safety wellbeing plan, which is a 10-year plan that is really driving a change in thinking, and it's a transformative change in how we approach these issues. It really is a collaborative process where we're bringing together the key areas of social service, healthcare, justice, police, business, all together in a collaborative way. We are just in the early stages of developing what is going to be a comprehensive multi-sector gun violence reduction plan under SAFETO. It's literally at budget council now, getting approvals necessary to make that happen. But in our learnings of developing SAFETO, and particularly the police involvement in some of the research and activities we've done along the way, I think you've really spoken to the key issue, is we have to find a way to get to the youth sooner in a way that's relevant to their needs and their specific needs. And we know from our gang prevention work, in our town hall meetings, in our engagement, that the community has spoken very clearly. There are some major strategies they believe would help. And the top 5 ones, I can actually provide them, the feedback we got, is opportunities for mentoring. Secondly, programs and recreation, job provision, job training. Certainly, there's been feedback that police being involved to provide a safe environment in communities, and tutoring is something young people have identified in the communities identified as particularly necessary to help stop the path and the cycle. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, if I may, I only have a few minutes left, but I appreciate the 5-prong approach. And you mentioned that this 10-year plan to really work with the community, listen to their needs, collaborate across various jurisdictions, social health, police, and others. And what can you give us an estimate of how much that's going to cost? Like, what is the ask to City Council?
The ask to City Council on that is actually coming from city staff, and unfortunately, okay, I don't have the specifics in front of me, but I can tell you there is a need for sustained investment where we support the integration of effort between social services, city agencies, and police and justice practitioners.
Okay, so you would agree that that would be the best investment of resources. Would there be anywhere else that you would invest resources? More police services, more social services? We have a few minutes left. If you can just outline a few areas that you think would best prevent gun violence now and in the long term, where would you put taxpayer dollars?
Sure, absolutely. So I think to start, as we've just touched on, is efforts to get at the front end or or upstream of what leads young people to pick up a firearm in the first place. So that we've covered. I think as it relates to some policing efforts, there certainly is a need. We've touched on it, greater tracing, greater analysis, and greater integration of data as it relates to what that teaches us so that we can deal with the flow of firearms onto our streets from a law enforcement perspective. And then provisions of support for victims and those impacted after the fact in the recovery and sustainable recovery in our communities.
And I appreciate that very much. And I really appreciate how much thought and effort all police associations across Canada. Winnipeg is focusing on a very community-based approach as well that is having great results. And the reason I ask about the dollar value is because we're seeing the federal government now, they're looking to do the gun buyback program, so to speak, that's going to cost upwards of $1 billion. Some say $3 billion. They're proposing a provincial handgun ban and $1 billion to go along with that. And I'm not hearing a single police association across the country saying that that's the best use of taxpayer dollars. They're outlining things that you're outlining as well. So again, if you can just comment with the last 30 seconds, more of where you think the best use of taxpayer dollars should be going.
So I'll address what you just addressed with the sourcing of where our guns are coming from that are harming our communities, and they're not domestically sourced. They are internationally sourced. So our problem in Toronto are handguns from the United States. So the issues around investing in what you described is certainly not going to deal with the crime problem we're facing in Toronto as it relates to criminal handguns and the use of criminal handguns. And we believe an investment upstream is a very valuable focus of resources.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Mr. McKinnon to take 6 minutes and pose his questions. The floor is yours, Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. We appreciate your testimony. It's most helpful. I mean, there's a great deal of data that you've offered. It's sort of drinking from a fire hose here. Certainly, one of our focuses in this study is gun crimes committed by members of street gangs and organized crime and so forth. And it seems to me from this testimony that is a preponderance of where the violence is coming from. I'd like just to verify that. What proportion of gun-related violence arrives from domestic situations or people who are not previously involved in a criminal lifestyle, but who suddenly take it upon themselves to make an ideological or religious attack on some group. I wonder, perhaps we could start with the Toronto Police Service, and perhaps you could give some insight on that.
Thank you for that question. When it comes to the gun violence the city is experiencing, I can tell you that we are seeing more guns being fired and discharge of firearms in public spaces, not in people's homes, not in confined spaces. We're also seeing it's difficult to draw a clear line of what is a gang shooting and what is a shooting that's drug related or related to protection of turf or business, illicit business. What we do know is we have a serious issue with respect to the proliferation of firearms amongst persons that are not readily known to be gang members or associated to gang. So more and more shootings and more firearms recovered from persons who are not necessarily directly related to gangs as we identify gangs or have the intelligence to identify them. But that speaks to one of the intelligence challenges that we face, is the ability to understand precisely who is legally can be identified as being in a gang. But we do know the proliferation of guns is becoming more widespread. And we see from our demographics as it relates to age, the age is dropping significantly. And we've recently had shootings involving extremely young people, very concerning trend. So as far as how many are domestic violence, I don't have it broken down that way, but I can tell you our shootings are not the predominant problem. Our shootings out on the street between rivals or persons with no apparent connection to one another.
Thank you. I'll extend the same question to Edmonton Police Service, please. Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's certainly an increase in relation to the gangs, but as Deputy Demke said, sometimes the data and the correlation, I mean, obviously you have to get this right. As I said earlier, 12 of our homicides in Edmonton were related to gang activity, but out of that, there's at least 9 that quite likely could be. And there's also a strong correlation to the drug trade in relation to that as well. So, you know, those things are a big concern for us for sure. It's a smaller number when it actually gets to domestic violence, as you've asked. I think we only had one particular one in relation to homicide, but certainly our target and what we're seeing as trends here, which is a bit disturbing in some of our homeless camps, certainly in Edmonton and in Calgary, we're seeing some gang infiltration in relation to the drug trade, in relation to firearms as well. And that's another growing concern that seems to be trending upwards as well. So something that we obviously monitor. We obviously have systems in place in relation to that. Our alert model, the combined law enforcement model for the province of Alberta has made some big impacts in here in relation to that, but it's a trend that has certainly caused the greatest amount of concern because it's organized. And again, as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of youth involved. And as we know, it comes back to that whole thing. When you deal with a gang, you also got to deal with a feeder system and ensure that you take that out as well. So that is one that we pay probably the closest amount of attention because of the random shootings. And when we know when random shootings happen, obviously innocent victims often get hurt.
Thank you. I'll extend the same question to the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Chief Bray. But I'm getting a sense of that. If you wish to respond to that, that's great. Alternatively, or as well, perhaps you could address the question of proliferation of firearms. There's been some discussion that as we interdict firearms from the illegal market, the price goes way up, and there's some thought that that might fuel the business because it makes it much more lucrative to sell firearms. On the other hand, it's more difficult perhaps to buy them. So Chief Bray, I wonder if you could opine on one or both of those questions.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Yeah, you know, I think in general terms, what I can say is that the Canadian Association Police work that is going on knows that there are gun problems across Canada. However, they somewhat vary by region. And so the type of guns being used, how those guns are being accessed or falling into criminal hands, it does vary throughout the country. And so, you know, we need to work in ways that we can have laws and legislative change that does make it tough and prevent firearms from falling into the hands of criminals by, you know, safe storage laws, record keeping, those types of things. But I do think it's important to understand that you're hearing
sorry, you're gonna have to wrap it up in 10 seconds.
Yeah,
sorry.
A very, very strong theme. Most people that are committing crime are with guns are criminals that don't have the ability to possess them. So it's not law-abiding gun owners committing the majority of these crimes.
Thank you. I would now invite Ms. Michaud to ask her questions. She has a 6-minute slot. Ms. Michaud.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here with us. We appreciate that. I would, first of all, ask a question to Mr. Gray of the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs. Thank you for sending us the information ahead of time. And you mentioned that you would have to find ways to reduce armed violence in our communities by coming up with best practices and based on relevant data. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about that? What are some of these best practices that could be most efficient?
Sure. So it really I think it speaks again to some of the practices that work in areas that are sometimes geographically different than others. So I've referred to that because the lower mainland of BC or Metro Toronto might look different than the prairie provinces when it comes to the sourcing of these guns and also the types of guns that are being used. And handguns is a good example. We see handguns in Saskatchewan, but predominantly most of the crime is committed by long-barreled rifles. And so in Saskatchewan, those guns and in Alberta and Manitoba, it's very similar. A lot of those guns are coming from break and enters that are happening. And so the work that we need to do there comes down to education on people, safe storage, not being able to have those guns stolen from a farmhouse, for example, and then converted and used in crimes. Whereas we're working closely with CBSA in the Metro Toronto area and Lower Mainland because of the high importation of guns that are being brought across the border. So it really is an approach that has to look at the region of Canada and the types of challenges that we have there. I'll just quickly say too that we can't overstate the importance of seeing the correlation between drug and drug-related activity and firearms. They are intertwined. People that are committing offenses are because they're involved in the drug world. The drug world drives a lot of violent crime, firearm-related crime in our country, and people committing the crimes often have a serious addiction problem, which just obviously perpetuates and causes this to continue to be a problem in the country.
Merci.
Thank you. When you talk about safe storage, are you referring to these legal arms, or do you think there should be laws that govern that the government has to be involved, police services also? That what is the source of the money to handle all of that, according to you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And, I think generally speaking, a lot of laws are laws that place restrictions on legal gun owners. And so I'm not going to say that there isn't a problem from time to time with legal gun owners. We have straw purchasing, for example, which is a situation where someone has a license to possess and purchase guns, purchases a large amount of them, and then sells them illegally on the black market. So that sort of thing does happen. But generally speaking, most of the laws we create are not going to be followed by the people that are committing the crimes with the guns. That's really what it comes down to. I had this conversation with Chief McPhee earlier today on the notion of a ban. A ban is only as good as the people that are willing to follow it. And, I said to Chief McPhee, we have a ban on murders in Canada, and yet we still sadly have homicides happening all the time. So I think we need to recognize and understand we need to look at the element of people that are committing these crimes. Yes, we can stiffen and bolden up the laws for law-abiding citizens, and we can try and limit access that way, but we've got to look at the criminals and in some cases the root cause of why they're committing the crimes, and on a higher level what we can do to really come after them from an enforcement standpoint.
You also referred to the ban, and in your statement you referred to C-71 and C-21. You said some of the legislative gaps have to be solved, the issues that lead to gun violence. What are some of these shortcomings as parliamentarians? How could we feed the debate and come up with legislative options to resolve these issues?
Sure. Thanks for the question. And I'll just speak quickly about the committee that I work on. So firearm tracing is something that I think needs to be enhanced greatly in this country. And yet most individual police organizations, the focus on firearms has to do with the offenses that are being committed with them. So in Edmonton or any of our major communities or smaller communities, when a firearm is used in the commission of an offense, we try and solve that offense. We hold the offender accountable. We seize the firearm. We get it through court purposes. But the notion of tracing the firearm and where it came from, its origin, and all of that work that has to be done, most organizations aren't set up that that's their focus. And so I think, again, the work that we're doing from the CACP level, we need to have some federal funding and resources allocated to tracing so that we can make it mandatory across Canada. And I think that will effectively allow us to dig into this problem, understand where they're coming from, and what we can do to prevent it.
Ms. Michaud, you have 20 seconds.
Thank you. Well, that clarifies a lot. The comments later on maybe with the minute I have left, we would look at tracing and then analyze some of the gaps. Do we have sufficient communication between the different police services, the Canadian Border Services Agency, the RCMP? So we'll get back to that. Thank you.
There will be other occasions. But now I would ask Mr. McGregor to take the floor. Mr. McGregor, you have a 6 minutes slot. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Chief Bray, maybe I'll start with you. Listening to your opening statement and some of the answers you've given to my colleagues, you really made that connection between the illegal firearms trade and the drug trade. And 2 years ago in 2020, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police really came out with what I thought to be a very bold statement in calling for decriminalization of simple possession. And, I need to give a shout out to my colleague, MP Gord Johns, who represents the riding of Courtenay Alberni. He's brought forward a private member's bill, C-216, which is going to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, as your association called for 2 years ago, specifically Section 4. Can you maybe just, talk a little bit about why the association made that statement 2 years ago? And if we were to move towards decriminalization for small possession amounts, how would that free up police resources to really tackle the more prominent issues that we've been discussing at our meeting here today?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the question. I think the position on decriminalization with regard to simple possession is really trying to understand that putting handcuffs on someone who suffers with an addiction is not going to solve the problems. It's going to temporarily take them out of the stream. That's all it's going to do. But unless there's some kind of a way that we can get them the help that they need, recidivism is going to happen. They're going to be back into that stream. And so often people that possess the amount of drugs for simple possession, they're fueling their own substance use disorder. And many times, we've said this before, they're not criminals by nature. Many times they're not. Not to say they're not involved in crime or highly susceptible to being victimized, but just by virtue of the fact that they're in that drug world, if we can get them the help they need, which often means drugs and addiction is not necessarily a root cause. The trauma that causes people to become addicted is the root cause. It is a big process, and the people that need help have to want help as much as the people that are giving help. But if we can find a way to help them get healthy, it's not even necessarily that it frees up resources to do something else, but what it does is it lightens the load in the long run, because people getting healthy means they're less likely to come into contact with police, and obviously that frees up police resources to continue to do the other work in the community.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chief Bray. Maybe I'll turn to Deputy Chief Demkiw from the Toronto Police Services. You had talked about the increase in shell casings retrieved at crime scenes, the trend that you're seeing. Can you extrapolate a little bit from that? What is that evidence pointing to? Is it pointing to people using larger magazines? Are they trying to illegally convert weapons into automatic fire mode? What are you extrapolating from that type of evidence?
Thank you very much for that. There's a few things. First of all, the amount of ammunition obviously available to illegal gun users is extraordinary. So each of those shell casings represents a projectile that flew in our city. That does not account, of course, for the use of revolvers, which don't produce shell casing at the crime scene. So the amount of ammunition available is definitely an issue. And you did mention overcapacity magazines. Our analysis shows that our seizure rate of overcapacity magazines has risen threefold. So there's definitely an issue on availability of the prohibited devices, the overcapacity magazines. And we have recovered handguns that have been modified for automatic fire with some internal manipulation, which is a growing concern because we're seeing those be seized as well.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Deputy Chief, I guess you've talked a lot about the efforts that Toronto Police Services are making at gang recruitment prevention and so on. And I know that where in the communities that gangs find some of their most fertile recruitment, those communities traditionally have had a lack of trust with police services. Can you talk a little bit more about, how are Toronto police officers rebuilding that trust, and is it just more of a presence, availability, so that people just of seeing your friendly neighborhood police officer who is being a little bit more open to being proactively approached?
I absolutely really appreciate that question. One of the key focuses we are engaged on is investing in our neighborhood community officers. And it's not as simple as just placing an officer there. It's a lot more than that. We need the knowledge, skills, and abilities in our police officers to work in those communities, to understand the unique needs of the individual communities. This is a city of 140 neighborhoods. Each of those neighborhoods has unique needs, unique situations they are living with. And we're identifying that our neighborhood officer program is one of the single most important things we're doing, investing in communities, providing a relationship building opportunity that's trusting in an effort to rebuild the trust that we know is challenging. We've also took a look at, I mentioned strategic enforcement. We have very much recalibrated how we do our enforcement, recognizing the social costs. And we're very much focused on being our enforcement to be geared towards the most impactful offenders in the least impact it can have on the community while we do our enforcement. So we're very conscious of that.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're now moving into the second round of questioning, and there won't be enough time to the top of the clock. So we're going to have to divide the time as best we can towards the end of the second round. So let's start. Mr. Lloyd, you have 5 minutes. If you could make that a little bit less, that would make the decision at the end of the hour a little bit easier, but the floor is yours now.
I'll try, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Chief Demkiw. If the federal government announced a plan to spend $1 billion to buy back hard drugs off the street, would that have an impact on the demand for hard drugs on the streets?
Well, I don't think that necessarily would solve the health issue that people are struggling with in their addictions. We need to get to the root issues, as was mentioned by others today, as it relates to why people are addicted. Safe supply and wraparound services are all part of that conversation.
Of course. But if the government's policy was that they wanted to buy hard drugs off the street as a means to, reduce the proliferation of drugs on the street, would that be an effective tool to get hard drugs off the street?
I do not believe it would be an effective tool.
So why should it be effective for gun policy?
I would not suggest it was effective for gun policy. City of Toronto's experience is the guns are not from law-abiding citizens that are being used in crime. They're guns smuggled from the United States. Those engaged in handling those firearms are not law-abiding licensed gun owners. They are criminals with no firearms license.
Thank you, Chief Demkiw. Pivoting to my next sort of angle here, we're talking about where best taxpayer money can be spent on, preventing crime. I believe diversion is key, especially getting youth out of the system. But we've heard previous testimony at this committee that basically our prisons are being used as gang recruitment and training centers. I was wondering, what are some recommendations on ways that we can disrupt organized crime's work in the prisons?
If that's directed to me, I would suggest that one of the key elements is, again, information and intelligence to understand the relationships that exist in the prisons to disrupt the ability of gangs to exert their influence within the prison system. So the ability to understand the intelligence that we need to disrupt the dynamics that play out in the prison population.
Is there a role for sentencing? Because, when people go into the prison, if they're in prison for a less period of time, if people are coming in and out of the prisons with more frequency because sentences are being reduced, does that increase or decrease the ability of organized crime to effectively train and recruit people in prisons?
I can take that.
Thank you, Mr. McPhee.
I used to be the deputy minister in charge of corrections and policing as well. So I think the best thing that you can do there right there is sort intake. And as Myron has said, the deputy has said, is get the right people in jail and hold the people responsible, the others. So the whole thing that we've talked about, Edmonton Police Services reallocated $38 million of their budget into community safety and well-being, partnered with social workers. We've hired social workers, mental health workers, navigators to take out the vulnerable, but the serious people in relation to the trafficking, etc., they actually need to go to jail and need to be rehabilitated in jail. When you mix the two together, when you mix low risk and high risk, they all become high risk. So basically sorting that intake is absolutely essential, and having a police service that's balanced on both approaches is absolutely critical. So you need
my final question, so I can give some time back to the committee. We heard witness testimony indicate that if sentences are very short, it's very difficult to rehabilitate people. Is that your experience, that longer sentences make rehabilitation more effective?
Depending on what the offense is, but there is absolutely more time in a rehabilitation setting. But the other piece to that, as you mentioned earlier too, is you got to get the people out of the system that shouldn't be in jail as well, and let that system actually do what it was designed to do. And right now, it's just a mix mash of everything in there. So it's a real opportunity for sure.
Thank you, Chief.
I'll give the committee back some time.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And Mr. Chang, I'm going to ask you to be equally generous, even a little bit more generous. Why don't we say that you'll have 3 minutes, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is directed to Chief McPhee. We know that the positive relationship between police officers and the communities are important. Could you provide some information on gang prevention strategy and partnership with local communities, organization to link accused offender and the family with various services in your city?
Yeah, for sure. Several actually, and as I mentioned, we've reallocated $38 million to work in the community safety and well-being space. We just did a commitment to action for, I think we had thousands of interactions with a lot of our marginalized communities, and it's to build that relationship. So if you think about it on a different side, when you take out somebody that's drug trafficking in a gang, there's always a family member associated that's going to fill that vacancy. So the reality is what you need to do is you deal with the offender, as mentioned in the last one, but you also got to deal with the feeder system, with partners in the community that can actually help stabilize that environment to ensure the feeder system doesn't stop. Because if you just tackle this all in one end, all on the enforcement side or all on the prevention side, there's absolutely no chance you can actually make an impact in this. What we're finding, what Edmonton has done by hitting this on 4 different areas and getting the community involved in relation to some capacity building, it's actually starting to pay off. So those relationships, to your point, are critical, but the other piece to this equally as critical is to take out that serious violent disruption that is often gang associated, as Chief Bray and Deputy Demke has said, is most often the case. So it's balanced enforcement with the community safety and well-being.
Thank you so much, Chief. My next question is to the Deputy Chief for Toronto Police. The Toronto Police Service conducted a gun buyback program. During this period, over 2,200 long guns and over 900 handguns were retrieved. According to the Global News article, officials said it was the police service's most successful program in Toronto's history. Could you speak about the success of this program and how other police service may benefit from a similar program, Deputy?
Well, I would say the success may be quantitative insofar as the number of guns turned in. But when we talk about, again, and that may have made some tangible difference in collecting guns that otherwise were unsafely stored in attics or behind walls in the basement. But when it comes to the use of criminal handguns and the proliferation of handguns, that is not where the successes come from. It's not from that kind of buyback program. That buyback program, frankly, was for the most part people turning in guns that were never going to be part of the criminal element to begin with.
Very much. Thank you. Ms. Michaud, we're virtually out of time, but I want to give everybody at least time for one quick question. The floor is yours, Ms. Michaud, and you've got 30 seconds.
Merci.
Thank you. My question will be very brief. Senator Mr. Bray, what are some of the main obstacles in fighting the illegal arms trade based on what you see on the field with the different police services?
I would say thank you for the question. Very quickly, it is we need to enhance the communication between organizations like CBSA, Canadian Firearms Tracing Center, and others that do this work. And we need to invest money in the more global issue of firearms in Canada. Each police service does a good job of handling their crimes that are happening in their jurisdiction or community, but we need to also look at it globally and enhance good data so that we can make good decisions and try and restrict firearms and these crimes happening in Canada.
Thank you very much, Chief. I'm sorry, everybody. This is just the way it is. We could spend unlimited time. We don't have it. Mr. McGregor, how efficient can you be with 1 minute?
I can be very quick, Chair. Just to the Toronto Police Services, we have seen in the news lately reports of people 3D printing components, use of ghost guns, etc. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about what your intelligence services have found on that and what kind of a trend we can expect in the years ahead?
Well, that is something we're certainly conscious of, but we're not seeing it in the volume we are other issues. So I think, but as that technology evolves, I think there's something for us to keep an eye on. It's something we're very much aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Mr. Shipley, can you ask a question in 1 minute, please?
I had already put my stuff away. Sorry, I thought we were ending it right there, Chair, but I could certainly do that. A quick question for Mr. Demkiw, Acting Deputy Chief. You mentioned that 86% of the gun crimes could be sourced. Why can the other guns not be sourced? What prevents that from happening?
The obliteration of serial numbers, for example, where we're not able to recover the serial number, lack of markings effectively. So the criminal element does take opportunities to obliterate serial numbers from time to time where we're not able to restore them.
So very, very quickly, if 86% can be sourced and you know they're from the United States, would you have any estimates, and I know it's a guesstimate, on what the total percentage would be that would be sourced from the US?
Oh, for us, it's 86% of all criminal handguns.
No, but that's the ones that could be sourced. I'm saying the ones that couldn't be sourced. If you had to guess at those other ones that couldn't be sourced.
Oh, I would suggest that the 13% or whatever, or 14% that's left, the vast majority will likely be American. There might be some Canadian. I can't say that's not the case. We've seen that, but we do know that the United States continues to be the issue.
So very close to 100%.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Sorry,
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Mr. Noor Mohammed, you have the luxury of 60 seconds, and they're yours starting now.
Sorry, Chair, on that basis, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give notice of a motion, please. The motion is as follows: that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the rise of ideologically motivated violent extremism, IMVE, in Canada. That this study include an investigation into the influence of foreign and domestic actors in funding and supporting violent extremist ideologies in Canada. That the study include the use of social media to fuel the IMVE movement. That the committee explore the impact of anonymous and foreign donations funding IMVE, including through crowdfunding sites. That the committee invite representatives from Give, Send, Go to appear. That the committee further look at the role of payment processors in preventing the funding of IMVE and invite representatives from PayPal and Stripe to appear. That evidence and documentation received by the committee from upcoming appearances of representatives from GoFundMe and FINTRAC be included in the study. That this study include Canada's national security organizations and police in monitoring, countering, and responding to IMVE threats. That the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to that report. I'm just giving notice. I don't intend to debate this today. I'll send the clerk to circulate in a few minutes, and I want to thank Mr. McGregor for his contributions and his partnership in helping to put this together. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so notice has been given. The motion then has to be translated, and then we'll be up for discussion at our next meeting, which is on Thursday. Thank you very much. That ends this round of questioning, and it ends this hour, plus a few more minutes, but not very many more. On behalf of members of the committee, I want to thank the witnesses and know how grateful we are for the work that you do on the front lines, how difficult it is in a moment when tempers are pretty high and anxiety is on the rise in our country, and you see it and you feel it and you know it and you have to cope with it. So thank you on behalf of all members of the committee and through this committee, all members of Parliament, for the wonderful work you do. We appreciate it. Colleagues, we need to take a short break because the panel is changing. That means that the clerk and his technical people will have to do some sound checks. So we'll suspend, I'm hoping, only for 5 minutes. See you in 5. with us this second hour by video conference as an individual, Robert Henry, Assistant Professor, Department of Indigenous Studies, University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Kaylin Langman, Assistant Clinical Professor, Department of Medicine at McMaster University. 16,000 little steps to healing INC. Stan Tiuanunafuk, co-founder. I'm sorry, I probably did not do justice to that beautiful name. I'll try better next time. You have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Witnesses may choose to share their time with other witnesses if they wish. Welcome to all of you. I now invite Mr. Henry to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. First, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about these issues. I'm Métis from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and as was stated, an assistant professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan here. I'm also the executive director of the Natawin and Mamawi-Kiakiak Health Research Networks, which are part of the CIHR's Network Environments of Indigenous Health Research. I'm also part of international research partnerships that are looking at examining prison violence in New Zealand, and have been invited to speak at the United Nations on issues related to gender and transnational organized crime. I'm a community engaged researcher who works closely with community partners with Indigenous peoples engaged in street lifestyles. My research has taken me to examine the complexities and issues related to the term of street gang itself and the problematic issue of data collection and why and how individuals engage and exit street gangs. Research has shown that we actually know very little about street gangs because of the ambiguity of the term itself, wherein a street gang in one community is not a street gang in another. Therefore, we have a lack of national data sets available to us. Also, when we were talking about street gangs, are we looking into biker gangs and other organized criminal orgs when we were talking about this, or are we just focusing within street spaces? Does our focus here focus on hate and ideology groups? How does this impact the ways in which we engage in these discussions? And what is gang crime or street gang crime? These are questions that we need to examine and ask ourselves. For example, when we start to use the gang term loosely, we create gang talk where we look to create fear and use fear for political agendas. As such, this is why I try to stay away from the term gang itself and use street lifestyles, as individuals are moving in and out of street gangs, however, are connected to underground, illegal, or untaxed economies. So to move back to my work specifically, we have to understand violence. Why is violence used, and how does it escalate to a point where firearms and shootings become necessarily and normalized within different spaces? Through my research, as well as research conducted internationally, we see that masculinity becomes a focal point, where it is a hyper-masculine performance that is promoted within the street, where challenges to one's face, their status, respect, or power becomes a primary reason why an individual may act out with specific violence and a hyper-violence, where we see an increase in gun violence. However, we also have to understand that the violence is framed within localized street codes and street justice. These codes then frame how violence is used and the level of violence that needs to be used to protect oneself or protect their face, if you will. Again, because of the connection of masculinity, going to the police or others to help or support individuals actually is problematic, because they're not going to go to them for help, as they will be labeled as unable to look after themselves, and it actually increases their victimization for later in life. Finally, I want to move to the idea of addiction and how we examine this within criminal justice. Most often, addiction centers on substance misuse. However, we need to move beyond this simplistic understanding, because we have to look back to the spaces where power, respect, and status are also addictive. When individuals are provided a space where they feel power over themselves and others, it becomes addictive. Violence creates trauma. Trauma without proper supports moves people to find alternatives to deal with the trauma. This then moves to substance misuse, where substances are used to numb the trauma and pain. In the end, we want to see a decrease. We need to look at how we build healthy relationships that are community-led, not by police, because of the negative relationships in some communities, but rather police need to come in as partners. Second, we need to look at moving from punitive and criminal justice approaches to more of a public health approach, since the discussions continue to focus on, and with the panel before, the idea of addictions being the root cause of this violence that's happening. So we cannot arrest our way out of it. We cannot incarcerate our way out of it. We need to look upstream. So with that, I'll heed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. I would now then like to ask Dr. Langman You have 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes for your opening statement, sir, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for letting me present my research regarding Canadian firearms legislation and its association with homicide, spousal homicide, mass homicide, and suicide in Canada. I am a professor of medicine at McMaster University and an emergency physician in Hamilton, Ontario. I serve as an academic peer reviewer in the areas of firearms control, homicide, suicide, violence, and gang deterrence for academic journals such as Violence and Victims, JIV, American Journal of Public Health, Journal of Preventive Medicine, and Nature. I would also like to agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Henry and what he just said. I have submitted 3 of my peer-reviewed publications to the committee for review. I will summarize those findings and the implications. The first publication, Canadian Firearms Legislation and Effects on Homicide, examined multiple legislative and regulatory interventions, such as whether bans of certain semi-automatic firearms and restrictions of military-appearing firearms, certain types of handguns, magazine capacity, restrictions, registration, and background checks were associated with reductions in homicide and spousal homicide. 3 statistical models were used. To summarize the results, no statistically significant beneficial associations were found between firearms legislation and homicide by firearm, as well as spousal homicide and the criminal charge of discharge of firearm with intent. Bans of military-appearing firearms, semi-automatic rifles and handguns, short barrel handguns, and Saturday night specials in the 1990s has resulted in no associated reduction in homicide rates. Rather, social and economic factors were associated with higher firearm homicide rates. For instance, the older the age of the population was associated with a lower rate of homicide using a long gun, while an increase in the unemployment rate was associated with an increase in spousal homicide. Homicide by handgun, usually used by people involved in criminality, was associated with an increase in the unemployment rate, poverty rates, and immigration. As well, the overall increase in incarceration was associated with the increases in homicide rates, likely reflecting an increase in crime rates overall. These results suggest further areas to study as well as beneficial areas to target by public policy to reduce homicide rates. My second paper, Effects of Firearm Legislation on Suicide and Homicide, expanded on the previous study by looking at homicide rates over an expanded time frame, as well as suicide. It also applied new statistical methods. This study confirmed previous research that legislation and regulatory effects, such as bans, had no associated effect on homicide rates. As well, the study demonstrated that suicide rates, while falling in males over the age of 45, with associated firearms legislation, there was an equivalent substitution with suicide by other methods, resulting in no overall difference in the rates of suicide. Factors such as unemployment, low income, and indigenous populations were associated with suicide rates. Other studies have demonstrated agreement with my studies that laws regard targeting these restricted firearms, such as handguns and semi-automatic and automatic firearms in Canada, have had no associated benefit with homicide rates. As demonstrated in a recent review article I was asked to write by the Journal of Preventive Medicine, Suicide, Firearms, and Legislation, 9 Canadian studies were found that demonstrated a switch from suicide by firearms to other methods, such as hanging, resulting in no overall changes in benefits. Data on mass homicide in Canada was obtained from Statistics Canada between the years of 1974 to 2010. Using a definition of mass homicide as a single event with 3 or more victims, no associated reduction in mass homicide rates were found with bans of military-appearing firearms, semi-automatic firearms, and background checks. Methods that have been shown to be more effective in reducing firearm homicide, involves targeting the demand side of firearms prevalence in criminal activity. As demonstrated by StatsCan, a significant percentage of firearms homicide involves gangs. In 1995, a youth violence study and program, Operation Ceasefire, launched in Boston, involved reducing the demand for weapons by targeting gangs, specifically in terms of warning and legal intervention, as well as working with the community groups and workers to reduce youth membership in gangs. The other arm of Operation Ceasefire involved reducing the supply of weapons by legal interventions. Braga et al. In 2001 examined both aspects of Operation Ceasefire and found that demand side had significant
Sorry,
effect.
Dr. Langman, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up. Take 10 seconds to wrap it up, please.
Had significant effects on reducing violence and homicide, while the supply side had no statistically significant effect. Hence, I would recommend going forward that we focus on programs that reduce the demand side of firearms acquisition in the future, especially in youth. Targeting them before they enter significant criminal activity would be beneficial in reducing firearms homicide in Canada.
Thank you very much. I would now like to turn to Mr. Tu Anukuafe. Did I do better that time? So sorry. You have 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir, and the floor is now yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. I too like to thank this committee for the invitation to be here today. My name is Stan Tui Nukuafe, and I'm the co-founder of an organization called Straight Up 10,000 Little Steps to Healing Inc., with its main office located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Many might not be aware that Saskatchewan had the highest number of gang-related homicides in the rural area in 2020, making up 40% of the country's gang-related homicides, or that the homicide rate among Indigenous people in Saskatchewan is more than 17 times higher than the rate among non-Indigenous victims, even though Indigenous people only make up about 10% of the province population. These statistics, as well as others, are reflective of the 95% Indigenous members Straight Up works with. As mentioned, I'd like to thank this committee for undertaking this important study to address these and other alarming statistics related to this topic. The topic, gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and gun crimes committed by members of street gangs, is something our organization clients have experienced in many degrees. Straight Up's unique approach in addressing these issues are the following. First category, who we are. Straight Up's mission statement is to assist individuals in mastering their own destiny and liberating themselves from gangs, addictions, and criminal street lifestyles. Straight Up is an independent, member-driven organization. It was conceived at the request and the involvement of 2 active gang members wanting support to abandon gang membership that for them had become destructive and dysfunctional. The first individual, the mother of his daughter, had been murdered by a rival gang member. The second had 2 younger brothers following in his footsteps. 20 years. In the last 20 years of working with street gang members, Straight Up has developed a methodology and approach based on the Indigenous medicine wheel, applicable to both rural and urban communities. Second category, our impact. In the last 20 years, Straight Up has worked with over 800 male and female individuals wishing to abandon their addictions and gang lifestyles. Straight Up has facilitated over 2,000 workshops and presentations regarding addictions and gang exit programs throughout Saskatchewan. Hiring of former gang members. Straight Up has hired several recovered gang members to work as mentors. This approach is unique to our organization. Their life experiences have been essential in educating Straight Up staff, community, and professionals involved with active gang members. Saskatchewan Provincial Gang Strategy. In 2018, in collaboration with the University of Calgary and the Students' Commission of Canada, Straight Up completed the most comprehensive research on street gangs in Saskatchewan. 2 reports, Building Healthier Communities, final report on community recommendations for the development of the Saskatchewan Prevention and Intervention Street Gang Strategy, and the Provincial Gang Strategy Forum and Community Consultation Reports, was developed with over 100 communities who participated in the process. Copies of these reports are available if requested. Gang Violence Reduction Strategy. In 2019, Straight Up was contracted by the Saskatchewan provincial government and funded by the federal government to develop and implement the community intervention model to support active gang members who wish to leave their gang association. The original contract was to work with up to 57 individuals. However, due to the high demand for these supports, to date, Straight Up has received over 220 referrals to this program and is actively working with over 97 individuals. Given 20 years of experience, we understand the need for further discussion and research. We are appreciative of being involved in the process. Straight Up looks forward to further involvement in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I will now open the floor to questions. This is a round of 6 minutes each. We're going to have to do a little bit of division for the second round, but we'll have a complete first one. Up first would be Ms. Tancho. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I appreciated all of your opening remarks and the hard work that you're all doing to support those on the front lines that are both youth in gangs and those impacted by gang violence. So thank you very much for your efforts. I have a few questions for Dr. Langman. Thank you for being here today. And as was mentioned in your opening remarks and the chair's introduction, you are a professor, you are an ER doctor, you have done groundbreaking research. I believe you're one of the few in Canada who has done the type of research that you have done, which is to look at the correlation, if any, between various gun control pieces of legislation from the 1970s to present. And I found your research fascinating, and it's a very good read for all policymakers. I highly recommend. When we last spoke, Dr. Langman, you had mentioned to me, just in very plain terms, because I'm not an academic, but overall there was no correlation between a decrease of homicides from gun violence or suicide from gun violence as a result of gun control. Can you just confirm that that's what your 3 studies in sum found?
Yes, that's correct. There doesn't seem to be any association with reductions in homicide from any of the legislative efforts that have been produced by Canada, both C51, C17, and C68.
Yeah, and that is very frustrating, I'm sure, for all policymakers, because we, of course, want to make a difference in ending gun violence in Canada, and different parties have different philosophies on how to go about doing that. But I appreciate your extensive research in that. I know that the long gun registry from, well, it's almost 2 decades ago now, cost us several $billion. I think it was $2 billion. Did you find any correlation of a reduction of gun violence from the long gun registry?
Absolutely not. Unfortunately, all that money appears to have been misspent. We're currently headed into the next round where many firearms are going to be confiscated or banned, probably another $1 billion. I really would think that the best focus would be to be spending this money on deterrence and reduction in the level of gang violence by reducing the number of youth that are starting to get involved in gang activity, by comprehensive methods like Operation Ceasefire, other programs, comprehensive gang strategy, Milwaukee Walk Around. All those methods use scientific methods to reduce the youth involvement in gangs. There's been several successful studies showing that, both here in Canada as well as in the United States, that these methods do work. Unfortunately, they are largely underfunded. A lot of it is a psychiatric issue. A lot of the people that are deterred from gang activity suffer from ADHD. They suffer from depression, anxiety, and they've had no help reducing or dealing with those issues. And once these programs, which are comprehensive, start involving those members in these programs in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, et cetera, they do see a significant reduction in recidivism and a significant, almost 50% reduction in attending and being level of attendance at university, at high school, and even some go on to university.
Thank you. And we had heard from Winnipeg Police, various members from there, and I've met with them as well. And they've mentioned that youth diversion is a critical, if not the best, one of the best things that we can do as policymakers to invest in that. They're saying they're seeing kids as young as 8 years old be brought in, sort of almost romanced into gangs and the gang lifestyle. They're often from broken homes, from deeply difficult economic situations without proper role models or stability in their lives. I think all members of this committee are very aware of the socioeconomic impacts on youth and the path that they often find themselves in on gang violence. It provides almost like some sort of new home for them. And so that's what we're hearing from some police officers. That's what I've heard. And so when we last met, you spoke about youth diversion. You're speaking about it now. And so what does that mean for people who may not understand? Like, from my understanding, it's a young person starting to commit petty crime, kind of getting pulled into a gang violence. Is that sort of the spot that we should be reaching out with resources to help them get on a better path. And you just spoken a little bit about that, so you can elaborate if you have more to say.
I think you summed it up quite well. There's several strategies, but most of them involve a comprehensive network. So often they will have a primary person in charge of the program, which will assess the youth at need and then determine which are the best programs for them to attend. The cognitive behavioral therapy and psychiatry, and as well training in terms of giving the youth a forward-looking approach. If they have job training or if they have training in anger management, they're often able to deal with the issues that turn them to gangs. A lot of them come from broken homes where they're not getting support at home, or the support at home is lacking because of low income. So they look at a comprehensive method of diverting youth from gang or criminal activity, especially when they start young. Some of the other methods, like Operation Ceasefire in Boston, it also involve police targeting. They found that only a small percentage of actual gang members were involved in a significant percentage of the violence. And they would go out and talk to the gang leaders.
I'm sorry, Dr. Langman, but you're going to have to wrap up. Take 10, 15 seconds to wrap up, please.
Yep, they would go out to the gang leaders and inform them there'd be serious crackdowns if they involved in violence. And that led to a significant reduction in violent activity from these gangs.
Thank you, Dr. Langman.
Thank you very much, Doctor. To Ms. Damoff, it's your slot. And 6 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I just want to acknowledge that I'm in Ottawa today, so I'm joining you from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people. Mr. Tuinukunafe, we heard at our last meeting from Bear Clan Patrol and from Mitch Bourbonnier from OPK. I've spoken to Liberty Youth from Hamilton, and they're going to be coming to committee. You're doing terrific work in Saskatoon, getting young people out of gangs or stopping them from getting into gangs. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on bringing organizations like yours and others across the country together for a bit of a summit to share best practices and give the federal government some ideas on how we can effectively both deal with young people getting involved with gangs or leaving them, and also how we can effectively strategy.
Thank you for the question. I think that idea is something that community agencies who work at the grassroots level would really appreciate. And the reason I say that, part of it is because the families that we work with, especially in the prairie provinces, do move back and forth to different provinces. And so there's many opportunities. You mentioned Mitch, where I would work with a family, they decide to move to Winnipeg. I would want to connect that family to another agency that family can become involved with, but also because we have built relationships with these families, when we send that referral, families are more likely to engage with that other community agency when they move to that province. And so that's an idea that I think would really benefit the type of work that we do. And so I really hope that we do it.
Thank you so much. I've been to your lovely town. I quite like Saskatoon. I think to both you and Dr. Henry, we know that there's a connection between we're seeing young people getting involved in street life, looking for a sense of community. We also know that mandatory minimum sentences have seen people sent to prison who probably would be better dealt with in addiction treatment or other programs. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the connection between sending young people to an institution and the impact that has on their involvement in crime and gangs.
that a question for
Yeah,
myself?
for you and for Dr. Henry.
I'll let
actually.
Dr. Henry start.
Sure. So we have to understand that prison really isn't a place for people to go to for addictions issues. It's just not conducive of the way it's set up, and it's just the supports that's just not set up in that way. So we need to understand if the individuals are heading in there for those issues, we either have to reframe the way in which we see prisons and how we're working within prisons and the programming within prisons, or we have to find alternative measures to keep people out of prison, and which is something that we're doing in Northern Saskatchewan in a lot of communities. There's divergent programs, youth circles and so forth, where youth who are involved in petty crime, if you will, are being diverted out of those systems and moving out, because it's those networks that they build within the system that allows them to become further entrenched with it. And when we look at this, I also want to bring in the idea, it's not just prisons, it's also looking at the child welfare system and CFS as well. When we look at individuals engaged in street gangs, especially with Indigenous people, we see high rates of individuals who have been multiply placed within child welfare systems, which for a lot of individuals say that was my first taste of understanding institutionalization. And that's where they start building their relationships, going through there with like-minded individuals within that. So I'll just leave it at that for now, because I just want the time frame.
And I'm only going to be able to give to you about 30 seconds here, Mr. Tuinukuafe.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of build on what Dr. Henry mentioned. One of the requirements that we have in Straight Up is that people that want to join write an autobiography. So I've read a variety of these autobiography, and a young person autobiography that I read said, when I was 89 years old, running the streets of Saskatoon, stabbing and shooting people, I wanted others to feel the pain that I was feeling inside. And so when this young person was in jail, what Dr. Henry mentioned, the issue of their emotional challenges they have are not being dealt with because this young person is locked up 23 and a half hours a day, 7 days a week, and no programming. They just become even more entrenched because they were able to build networks. Thank you.
Thank you both. Dr. Langman, could you clarify for me, your research ended in 2016, so you did not actually look at the impact of Bill C-71, which included extended background checks, forfeiture of firearms to the Crown under a prohibition order. Can you just confirm that your legislation ended prior to the introduction of Bill C-71?
Bill C-71 in terms of yeah, it ended in 2016, this recent study. There's not enough data to look at any effects from any newer legislation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, now I would invite Ms. Michaud to use her teach them all. Floor is yours, Ms. Michaud.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here with us. It's very interesting to receive people from so many different horizons, representatives of the government, police chiefs, and now people that delve into these issues more specifically. And I think this shows we can work on several fronts at the same time. We're talking about the illicit trafficking in arms. We think more has to be invested on border services, different police services, different agencies. Should work better together, maybe invest more, come up with more resources, but also invest in prevention. And I think that's an area where you have a lot of expertise. Maybe starting with Mr. Langman, your research has shown that homicide is linked to sociological factors. So maybe you can tell us a little more about that. And in your opinion, based on your research and your studies, what should the government's role be beyond what I mentioned earlier? I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. But in terms of prevention, some of the social aspects, how can the government handle these issues?
I think I'd like to echo what Dr. Henry and Mr. Tuinukuafe said. We're seeing a lot of people in the emergency department. Both methamphetamine addiction has become a significant issue, as well as fentanyl, and that street trade drives a lot of this crime. We're seeing people released from prison into the community again with no psychiatric treatment. They're often not competent and able to take care of themselves, and they quickly revert back to criminal activity, and as well as drugs. What I saw in the research is in particular with handguns is that the unemployment rate and the poverty indexes were all associated with handgun homicide, and this is not surprising. It is the weapon of choice by gang members. It's easy to conceal, and in most crimes, when the police find firearms afterwards, it is handguns that is being used. If we want to target some of these issues, I would suggest diverting youth at an early age, when we know that they are starting to run into problems with the system, the criminal justice system, as well as diverting them when we find mothers that are reaching out for help, both even in the emergency department, but as well in the community, when they have no support for their children, when the children have no psychiatric support. It takes sometimes months for a referral from me to a psychiatrist for these patients, for them to be seen. I would strongly recommend that you divert money towards psychiatric care, as well as some of these anti-gang initiatives. I would suggest you speak with the directors of the Milwaukee Wraparound for further information as to how to successfully set up these anti-gang and youth programs in Canada. Once some of these people are entrenched and become older, they no longer are receptive to a lot of these programs. So I would suggest we target at an early age.
Merci. J'aimerais entendre.
Thank you. I would like to hear the representative from Straight Up. Based on what you heard Mr. Langman said, would you agree with that? And if so, and I would imagine so, do you have examples of efficient preventive programs that are already available, or things that we should invest some more in? I just want to hear your opinion on that.
Thank you for the question. I think what I'd like to add, if I was to kind of show you kind of in practical terms, because we work with individuals involved in both the provincial and federal system, it's not uncommon where I would get a random phone call and someone would say, "Hey Stan, I'm at the airport, can you pick me up?" They've just been released doing federal, like 3 to 5 years. They get a plane ticket, fly to Saskatoon, no one's there to pick them up. I pick them up and take them to a shelter, a homeless shelter. Okay, so the question becomes, could something have been intervened, better case planning in that process? So that's one piece. I think another topic I feel is not discussed often enough is if I was to give a general, this is very general, of the individuals we work with, they probably stopped going to school at grade 9 and 10. Generally, that's very general, okay? I don't have statistics, just my interactions with them. You know, the question becomes, how can schools play a better role in keeping these young people in the school system instead of kicking them out? Because as everyone knows, you know, once they leave school, their opportunities become more limited. I think a program, like I mentioned, is a program like Straight Up. We're very unique. We started in Saskatchewan, and as I mentioned, we've been 20 years, but we're very underfunded. As I mentioned, the provincial gang strategy, the gang violence reduction strategy was just funded 2 years ago. But prior to that, for 18 years, we've been doing volunteer work. So, you know, funding programs in this province that already exist would be a start.
Thank you very much. The timing was absolutely perfect. Mr. McGregor, the floor goes to you. You have a 6-minute slot. Proceed, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Henry and Mr. Tuinukuafe, if you could maybe each take a turn at answering this. So, Dr. Henry, you talked in your opening statement about, you know, how the police really need to be partners in effectively addressing this. And as you may be aware, this committee in the previous Parliament released a pretty comprehensive report on systemic racism in policing in Canada. Among the many recommendations, included, having the Government of Canada provide increased funding for restorative justice programs to make sure that they're effective and widely available, that the RCMP work with Indigenous communities to make sure that we had advisory committees in each of their communities, and also that we prioritize the recruitment of Indigenous people and women into Indigenous police services. Just on the theme of some of those general recommendations, do you have any other that you had on how we rebuild a lot of the trust between Indigenous communities and policing services? And if you have anything more to add that maybe this committee needs to include in its recommendations.
So I'll go real quick here. One, I think it's a start. I think that one of the things that we do see within the research is that actually hiring more Indigenous police officers without changing the culture of policing itself does not actually make a bit of difference, because they have to frame within that culture. Mm-hmm. Two, when we start looking at these programs that everybody's been talking about a little bit here with Milwaukee and everything else, I think we have to be very cautious when we're saying we got to get programs for these youth. If we create programs for the youth, but we don't actually create spaces for the youth to feel like they belong in our communities, no program is going to work. So no matter how much we put into there, if the community itself is not engaged in an anti-racist, trying to deconstruct or decolonize individual spaces, if individuals who are living in racialized poverty do not have opportunities for jobs because business owners don't trust Indigenous people, they don't trust the Black body, nothing's going to work. So then we live in a capitalist society. So where do they go get their money? They have to go to the streets. So when we're talking about programs and we're looking at prevention, education and all these things are important. But if there's no opportunities for individuals to actually see a livelihood for themselves, why would they go in that way? So we have to look at the street as a space in which individuals can actually go to survive within this sort of space. How do they provide for one another within that? So when we look at this and the development of all of this, one way that has to happen that I've seen positive in working with gang members and communities is the reshaping of the relationship of police within the community, and where the police don't come in as the knowers of what to do, but rather come in and say, how do we help you with our job and with our resources? And it's that reshaping of it. And for too long, police have taken the main lead in all of this, which has fragmented the relationships between the community and policing, because there's a long history, especially within Indigenous spaces, of the police being used as a way to hyper-survey and hyper-incarcerate Indigenous bodies, which, if we look at the statistics across Canada, the Indigenous body is hyper-incarcerated. It's not mass incarceration, it's hyper-incarceration on racialized bodies, especially in the prairies. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
And maybe the only other thing that I would add to that, in the provincial gang strategy report, especially in Indigenous communities, one of the things that they overwhelmingly mention is that a lot of times RCMP officers will come to their communities and they're generally there for 2 to 3 years. Because they're kind of viewed as the experts on gangs, they start the program, but when those RCMP officers leave, the program dismantles. And so I think more of a focus on how, as Dr. Henry mentioned, how does the community take the lead? That's why it's important for the community to take the lead, and the RCMP officers are coming in as partners to that. So I think I'll just add that piece.
Thank you. I think you both have illustrated quite adeptly just how a study on guns and gun trafficking and gangs really has just so many threads and just cannot be looked at in a silo. It really touches on so many different areas. Dr. Henry, you mentioned the Correctional Service of Canada and its current inadequacy at providing programs for the safe reintegration of people who have served their sentence to make that transition to the community. If you are there specific recommendations you would like to see in our report for the Correctional Service of Canada that sort of touch on what our study's looking at, gun trafficking and the gang recruitment and so on?
Well, I think if we're actually going to look at, I just see all of this as reducing violence. And how do we reduce this hyperviolence? And it's all connected to hypermasculinity. And so when we look at programs, we need to re-engage in this idea of what does it mean to be masculine within society. It doesn't mean about demasculating individuals, but how do we engage in this toxic and hypermasculinity, which is favored within street and prison spaces? And it's that sort of connection that's there. So if we're going to look at programming, Dr. Langman talked about CBT. CBT is good at reframing individuals' thinking, but we need to look at reframing and saying, okay, what does it actually mean to reframe the use of mass behaviors? And this means that also women engage in this sort of behavior too, because it's not just a male thing, that this behavior that we're looking at can be identified as hypermasculinity and the way in which it's brought out within street spaces. So it's that needs to be addressed. And that's what needs to be in programming, not just within jails, within the CSC, that's what needs to be starting to address at the very young age as well. Like, what is those mentorships and the mentoring programs, and what does it mean to how to move individuals on how to deal with issues.
Sorry, but we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we're moving into the second round, and my quick calculation is this. We have 6 minutes left, and it would be a 25-minute round. If I cut everybody in half, we would only go a few minutes over the appointed hour. Does that sound like a reasonable way to proceed? Do I have agreement to do that? Okay. So Mr. Van Popta, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us here today and informing us on these very important topics. I'm going to start with the Straight Up organization. Stan, thank you for your comprehensive evidence that you gave to us, and for the work that you and your organization do for the community. My question to you is about helping young people get out of gangs. What are some of the challenges that they face and that you face as you help them to transition out of gangs?
I think when I think of the challenges, just because of time, I'll try to make it, it's all at different levels. So for one individual, you might be getting them into a school program. They're 13, 14 years old. To give you a sense, a lot of the individuals that I've worked with, they've been to 10 different elementary schools before they reach grade 9. So think about 10 different elementary schools before they're 13, 14 years old. And so think of the academic gaps that student has. So once they become involved in the young justice system, getting a young person into a school program could be challenging. That's one piece. Another challenge is employment. Yes, they could be 18, 19, but never really had a job, right? So that could be another challenge for that person. So I think that the challenges depends on the individual, but it affects the education piece, the employment piece, and just life skills, programmings that they need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, you have another 20 seconds. Go ahead.
I'll concede it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zuberi, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
I want to thank all the witnesses for being here and acknowledge that I'm speaking from the island Montreal, also the traditional meeting space of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation of Mohawk peoples. I'd like to ask Dr. Henry, I think you really highlighted, and all the witnesses have done this actually, important aspects around moving from punitive to public health. And you were about to expand upon programming. I'll give you about 2 minutes or less to talk about that, please.
Yeah, so when we look at programs, and I think Straight Up is an example, OPK with the Bear Clan are examples of the ways in which community partnerships work, working where people are at. When we're building programs and moving forward, it needs to be done in a way that provides, is reshaped by the realities of individuals that are actually facing, and we need to engage in that sort of space. And so when we're engaging with programs, it has to also be the community itself. When we focus just on the individuals who are committing the crime and not the environment in which it's being created, so this also includes the broader community within this. If we focus on gangs as being that they are individuals who are searching for belonging, we have to ask the question, why are they searching for a sense of belonging, and how are we as a community pushing them for another place to belong? And so we need to start reframing the way in which we ask those questions. And I think that's where we get changed.
Can you touch upon the hypermasculinity that you were speaking about also?
Sure. So when we look at this idea of hypermasculinity, this is the way in which it's connected to street codes and street justice. So when we look at the ways in which violence is being done, so in order to protect my face, I create a mannerism, which I go out there. My name now becomes Stan. I'm Stan, I'm the tough guy, I get respect, status within this. When violence comes onto me, I have to look after it myself, but it has to be violence that's associated to the codes of the street. If the code of the street says if I get beat up, then I have to find violence in order to do that. Once this violence also becomes escalated, because if I show people that I'm willing to go above and beyond the violence that was done onto me, it will give somebody a second thought to do violence onto myself or those around me at the same time. However, the violence then gets transmitted onto that person who got violence will look for retribution and will up at that. That's why we see low levels of violence. When we look at violence within gangs in particular, there's hardly any violence for a while. And then all of a sudden there's this huge escalation that happens right away. And it's just one over the other until there's a de-escalation, which is usually a bunch of gang leaders coming together and say, we need to just calm this down because it's interfering with our business.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ms. Michaud, my calculation is that you've got about 75 seconds, but that sounds like a question to me, so go and ask it.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, Mr. Henry, if you had a proposal to make to the government to get rid of the illegal arms trafficking and the connected criminality, what would that proposal be?
That's a huge question. I don't think I can answer it in 40 seconds right away, but what it would look like would be, it had to be multi-pronged sort of approach, and examining the ways in which, what is the street economy, how much money is actually going through the street economy, and how do we equivalate that money going through the street economy into a legal economy, so that individuals aren't moving just from one place into what some scholars have called Venkatesh and Levitt and the McJobs, and so they're not being at this low level place, but they're actually, how do we equate this, that sort of economy that is losing and replacing it with that. So it has to focus on that. It needs to engage in the idea of reshaping street code, street cultures, building healthy relationships within the communities. It has to focus on addictions. And again, addictions, not just a substance use. Substance use is a byproduct of the violence and the trauma within the streets. It needs to focus on addictions to power and everything else at the same time. So the behavioral addictions that need to go on. And when we look at violence and guns and everything else, we need to find ways in which to slow down the trafficking and the movement of illegal firearms. How that works, I'm not 100% sure within this short amount of time within that question, but it is a bigger question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. Now I will move to Mr. McGregor. You have a minute and change. You can change the world in a minute. Go for it.
Sure thing, Dr. Chair. Dr. Langman, in your opening statement, you were going over a lot of the research you had done regarding, the relationship between employment rates and crime occurrences and so on. Just very quickly, I'm looking at the case of people who have criminal records and their employability. Do you have any thoughts on what we can proactively attempt with the Parole Board of Canada? Because I know a lot of people who have criminal records find it very hard to reintegrate into society. And just, if they're demonstrating a willingness to try and reintegrate, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to answer that in a few seconds is hard, but the main thing is that I'm seeing directly, and I want to echo exactly what Dr. Henry is saying. I am seeing people discharged to the emergency department with significant drug addiction and discharged to the community from prison with significant drug addiction and mental health issues with no care facilitated after their discharge. So they come to the emergency department. This is an emergency for them. And I can only give them appointments 3 or 4 months later in time. That's just utterly ridiculous. You cannot expect someone to hold down a job if they're suffering from significant psychiatric or addiction issues. That's number one. As Dr. Henry said—
Dr. Langman, please, 5 seconds. Yeah. Well, okay, I don't blame you. You can't get into that complexity in 5 seconds, and I'm so sorry we don't have more time. Yeah. There will be 2 more questions. The first will come from Mr. Lloyd, who has 2.5 minutes. Mr. Lloyd, are you there?
I don't have any questions. I thought maybe one of my colleagues would take that.
Well, it's your slot, so go ahead.
Well,
Ms.
we're already
Dancho?
over time. We're already, yeah, sorry, Raquel?
Yeah, but we had an agreement that to be fair to the roster, we would go a few minutes over time. So it's your slot for Ms. Dancho. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, I just would like to give just some of the floor over to Dr. Langman to talk a little bit more about the Operation Ceasefire. I think this is a model in the United States that this committee should be looking at for best practices of how we divert youth to going into gangs. So Dr. Langman, if you could just illuminate us a little bit more on your knowledge of Operation Ceasefire and its successes.
Well, Operation Ceasefire is one of the older programs, but like I said before, what they did was they went to the gang leaders and the police did, and tried to get agreements between them all. As Dr. Henry said, when they meet, they can sometimes solve some of the issues, get agreements to cease violence. And they warned them that if they continued with violent activities, there would be significant crackdowns. Other programs, so Operation Ceasefire, there was a significant benefit from that. There was no benefit in terms of the supply side issues. So targeting traffickers, banning certain firearms, working on trying to trace firearms. There was no benefit in those actions. It's extremely difficult. And I think one of the issues that Dr. Henry spoke about was the hypermasculinity, and that's a definitive factor. And so I just reviewed a paper where a lot of the young men are carrying firearms in order to present that image of being masculine. Don't mess with me, I have a gun, and then their friends are carrying them too. And so if we can start working on that area, so what they did in that study was they worked on changing the attitudes towards violence and towards handling their anger, as well as behavioral therapy and other methods. And they did see a reduction in the carrying of firearms. Unfortunately, it was over a short period of time, so we don't know if this was sustained, but certainly those are the areas we need to move in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Langman. Again, thank you to all the witnesses for your hard work. Sounds like we have a lot, there's a lot that the witnesses shared in common today from all different, actually, sides of the spectrum. So I think that that's very promising for our report and our research, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question for 2.5 minutes goes to Mr. Noor Mohammed. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, thanks very much, and I'll try to keep my question brief. I really just wanted to dig into so much of the value that we've heard of in terms of mentoring programs, in terms of support for youth, in terms of training, in terms of creating safe environments for young people to thrive. So maybe, Dr. Henry, you could spend a couple of minutes, whatever time is left, kind of sharing with us your perspective on the importance of making sure that we are making the right investments in those types of interventions at the same time as we're thinking about the public safety elements. How do we ensure that the human safety elements are top of mind?
Well, I think that if you're looking at reducing violence and you're doing it from a community-based perspective, rather than applying a program into a community and telling the community to fit it, that's where we begin to see real change. Now, I agree with Dr. Langman that when we look at these other programs, Milwaukee, the ceasefire program, ROCA and everything else, what we need to do is look at them and look at what the structure of them are, but then localize it to specific issues in the community. Whereas before, what we've seen is 5 Gold Star programs being implemented into communities and the community fit that, and those models do not work. Therefore, that's why OPK, and I will refer to OPK and Straight Up as programs that kind of work from the grassroots up, where we see it takes long-term commitment for the change to happen. But again, these are very underfunded programs because they're not seen as 5 Gold Stars because they haven't been evaluated within those spaces.
I suspect that's all the time I have, so I'm gonna say thank you.
Thank you all very much, and for agreeing to go a few minutes over the scheduled time. I think it was worth it because of the valuable insights that we have heard from these witnesses, whom I would like to thank on your behalf. We understand how stressful and how tough your work is, whether you're researching it or on the streets or your own observations from all of those experiences. And on behalf of the committee and of the House of Commons, thank you very much. Colleagues, do I have an agreement to adjourn the meeting? That was a gavel. This meeting is adjourned.